Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We're going to start biology today. First class. Of course, it's one of my favorite subjects to teach. And I hope you enjoy it, and I think you will. So this is what we're going to talk about. This chapter is an overview of the whole subject. The first thing we're going to do is figure out, okay, what is biology? It's a science, right? You start any science, you have to figure out what it is. The second thing we're going to do is, how do we know there's such a science? Because we have made certain observation that if you look around your nature, it's not chaotic. There's a certain order and there's a certain balance in nature that we see. And then we're going to talk about, okay, if biology is the study of living things, as you will see. Biology is the study of living things. So what are living things? Is a rock a living thing? Yes? Is it? Not by definition from science point of view. Although there were rocks that would say salam to Prophet ﷺ, right? But from a science point of view, no. Okay? And finally, we should talk about perhaps one of the most important concepts, and that is how we study science. How do we study nature, mountains, trees, forests? Certainly, you can't put them on a scale and measure, right? So how do we study these things? And then we're going to talk about one of the most important concepts in science altogether, and that's called the scientific method. You got to know what it is. So, what is biology? The word bio, as in biosphere, biosynthetics, so it means life or living things. Logia is the study of. So biology is study of living things. More poetically, they say biology is the study of life. Because why? It sounds more poetic. But it's really the study of living things. Right? Study of living things. More precisely, if you wanted to say, biology is the study of the principles. Think about this. Principles. What do you mean by principles? Concepts. Principles. Concepts. Theories that allow us to understand our natural environment. Okay, natural environment. Okay, what does that mean? So, well, that sounds like a fancy statement, right? What does that mean? Okay, you look at this picture. It's beautiful. Allah has made it beautiful, right? It's a very beautiful picture. Now, this place probably looked like this for several years, decades, centuries, right? And everybody would come over there every year and say, oh, how pretty it is. How come it doesn't disintegrate? Right? Right? How come it just doesn't one day it'll go over there and right? Something must be putting it together, right? Now in this forest, for example, there are probably insects. How come they're not taking over the world? Yes? Now if you look at this picture, you see, oh, it's beautiful. But from a biologist's point of view, look how biologists see it and says, what would they see? They would see a lake, and they would see an ecosystem in there. There are fishes in there, right? There are weeds in there. There are plants in there. There are all kinds of living things just in the lake. On the surface of the lake, there are ducks and geese, swans, right? And in the forest, there are all kinds of animals. There's deers, opossums, bees, birds, right? And then you notice in the mountains, curiously, there's no trees in the mountains. How come there's no trees in the mountains? So what is it about the mountains that prohibits the growth of trees? So these are the things that we try to understand in biology. So what are the principles? How come the bees don't take over the world? How come the deers don't take over the forest? What are the principles guiding? What's prohibiting them? That's the principles. What are the concepts that explain that this place doesn't collapse in 1 year or something? You follow me saying? And what are the theories that help us understand why this environment remains so pristine and beautiful year after year after year? Does that make sense? Now, how do we know? How do we even know that there's a balance that exists? How do we know? Well, it just is, right? How do we know? Because countless observations suggest. So you have to have an eye. Right? Yeah. There's a difference between seeing and observation. That's what Sherlock Holmes says to Dr. Watson. Yes? So there's a difference between seeing and observation. So, how did you know that, Watson? And then Holmes goes, there's a difference between seeing and observation. He says, how many times you climbed those stairs to come in my room? He says, well, Watson says, countless number of times. And you go, how many steps are there? And Watson doesn't know because he did not observe. There's a difference. So when you look at all, you've been through all, you will wonder, do you ever wonder if there are male trees and female trees? See, there's a difference between seeing and observation. And there are some species of trees have male and female trees, and some have both male and female parts in the same tree. Yeah, like the ginkgo biloba, one of my favorite trees. There's a male tree and a female tree. It's usually male trees that are planted because they're not as messy. They smell pretty. Understand? So you have to have an eye for observation. If you observe, and then you'll see that there appears to be a certain order, and there's a balance in the world. Okay? And that one thing is related to another. In other words, what happens to one living thing affects another living thing. All right. Examples. Look, there's an order. It's not just, things are not just happening. And the second, living things are peculiarly, seemingly adapted to the environment. In other words, they know what they're doing, it seems. This leaf cutter ant. You've seen these pictures in probably cut, right? Leaf cutter ant. They cut the leaf. You know what I'm see this? Okay. And they carry the leaves. You know what they're doing with the leaves? They go eat it? They don't eat the leaves. You know what they do? They chew it up and they make it into these moist balls. Again, they put it over there. And that's their farm. What are they growing? They're growing like fungus. And they feed on the fungus. They're farming. It's amazing. Ever go over there and get the leaves and their little farm so they can have their dinner? You understand? So there is this order, right? I mean, it's not just haphazard. There is order there, right? They're doing something with a purpose. That's what we mean by order. Look at this. This is an insect-eating pitcher plant. It looks scary, right? It's the size of your thumb. Don't worry, it's not that scary. Like this way. It's an insect-eating pitcher plant. And then it has this hair thing, you see? And the hair are slippery. So the insect goes and they fall in, and those juices, they're digestive juices, they just break up. How does it know to do that? There's order. How did it figure it out? Right? Why are we enumerating these observations? Why are we talking about these? These are observations that suggest that things around us are not just haphazard. There is a certain order. Okay? Oh, look at this. So, living things that are adapted to the environment. Okay, on the left, that's a leaf-tailed gecko. You see it? You see the leaf-tailed gecko? I mean, how does it know? Okay, well, this is a leaf. I think I will evolve into an organism that looks like a leaf. How does that happen? Yes? If there was no order, if there was some principles that govern it, this leaf-tailed gecko would be out of place. Would look like, a pink banana or something like that. So how did this happen? There must be some principles governing this leaf-tailed gecko looking the way it does. How do we explain it? What are those principles? Darwin came up with one. Yes? To explain this phenomenon. And then you see the owl, same way, he's camouflaged in the tree. Because owls, why do owls camouflage in the tree? What is he doing with that? Camouflaging in a tree. Because they're nocturnal creatures. Yeah? So in the daytime, they want to hide, right? So daytime, you want to hide in the daytime. So they go in their sleep. And they don't want to be disturbed. You follow? So if they're camouflaged owl, they won't be disturbed. There is certain interdependence. In other words, what happens to one organism in an environment affects other organisms in the environment. So, we're talking about how the environment is not haphazard. That there are things there that seem to be certain order, and they are interdependent. So here's an example of how living things are interdependent. هذا honeybees. honeybees. What do? They pollinate. There was a time in 1990s this honeybee population died out for some reason. Died out. Okay? Some disease or something like that. It's similar. Now, you know what happened? The prices of fruits at Jewel and Dominick's went up like crazy. You go shopping at Jewel and Dominick's, you notice the fruits are like, wow, what happened here? They were like $2.99. They're like $7 a pound now. Why? Because of the honeybees were missing. They did not pollinate. The crop yield was poor. The prices went up. Did it affect you? So what happens to the honeybee? Does it make a difference to you? So when you hear about problems in the South, one farmer complaining about another farmer using a certain pesticide, there's a problem, then you should pay attention. Because why? Because it could affect you. Because all living things seem to be interrelated. You follow? So now, we talked about what biology is. Biology, simply put, is the study of living things. Living things. And then we suggested, why even there such a science? Because there appears to be certain order, example, the leafcutter ants, and certain balance in nature. What happens to one organism affects another organism, right? Okay, so what is living a thing? How is it that scientists do not classify the rock that Salam, the messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is a living thing? Right? Inshallah, when you write your own book, inshallah, perhaps you can introduce such concepts. What is a living thing? Because everything does this be. Yes? But according to science, there are some specific definitions. So that's what we're going to talk about next. There are 4 characteristics of living things. How many? 4. You have to know this. Mucho importante, señor. 4 characteristics of living things. Number 1, Rafi, what do you think? Very good. They have very orderly structure. If you look at them, okay, you're symmetrical, right? Halfway this order. Orderly. Number 2, what do you think, though? They grow very good. Even the bacteria, when it's baby bacteria, is tiny and then grows a little bit. Obviously. A tree, even the mightiest oak, starts as an acorn. Baby oak. Yes? They grow. They reproduce. Yes? Living things give rise to another living thing. You know, that's interesting, right? It's very fascinating. True, false. All living things come from other living things. All living things come from other living things. True, false? What do you think? True? Yes. If you asked it to people 200 years ago, they wouldn't know. More than half probably would say, yeah. Because there's a time here in America, they used to think that, okay, when it rains, you see a lot of worms on the street, right? Yes or no? When it rains, you see a lot of worms on the street, on the road. You have to be careful when you step on. Yes? It makes life very difficult. When it rains, so they used to say, oh, you know what happens? Well, there's horsehair everywhere. Because, you know, you buggy horses, your horse ride, right? Horsehair everywhere. When it rains, the water, the hair, and worms are just horsehairs. That was what people used to believe. But the fact that all living things come from other living things is a scientific idea. And it was actually very difficult to prove and disprove the other previous theories. And that's, in fact, is called the cell theory. It came about 1830s and 40s. Understand? We'll talk about that. But all living things come from other living things that are current in understanding, and they all reproduce, therefore. Number 4. What do you think? Give me a characteristic on that. Very cool. I'm so proud of you. MashaAllah. They adjust to changes in environment. This morning it was freezing cold in here. We changed the temperature. So to adjust to the environment, you must sense the environment, yes or no? And then you adjust to the environment. So these are 4 characteristics of living things that we're going to talk about in more detail. 1, they have an orderly structure. Right? 2, they grow. 3, they reproduce. 4, they adjust to changes in their environment. Orderly structure. Okay, now look. Example. This is a bacterium. It's got this little tail. The little tail is called a flagella. Okay? That's called a flagella. Helps with mobility. Helps move. If you look at the structure of this flagella, it is complex, but it's orderly, it's symmetrical, it's beautiful. So even in something that looks like a tiny little thing like this, it is remarkably structured. You follow? So living things have very beautiful structure. And not to mention DNA. The structure of DNA is beautiful, exquisite. Now, when Watson and Crick described the structure of DNA, right? February 23rd, 1953, they figured out DNA. You know what they said? This has to be the case. This has to be the right answer. Why? Because it's beautiful, he said. That's what he says. He wrote autobiography. He said they knew this has to be the case because it was elegant and it was beautiful. Follow? Very beautiful. Example, trees grow, right? Reproduce, right? Now, reproduction is essential for survival of the species. Yes? Okay. You must know this. You must know this. You have to know. First, you have to understand the word species in science has a very specific definition. Species in science has a very specific definition. There are 2 parts to it. How many parts? How many parts to it? The definition of species. 1, 2 organisms are considered same species if they can interbreed. If they can interbreed, I mean they can mate. Yeah. If they can't do it, forget about it. They're not same species. They have to be able to interbreed. Second, if they can interbreed and they produce offsprings that are fertile. In other words, they have babies that can carry on the line of the species. Does that make sense? If 2 organisms mate and they produce offspring, they're all infertile. I mean, they can't reproduce. That's the end of the species, right? You know what I'm saying? So they have to be able to mate, and they have to be able to produce offsprings that can mate, that are fertile. Yes? Therefore, horses and donkeys, not same species. Not same species. Why? Because when they mate, they can mate. But their offspring, the mule, is not fertile. All mules are a product of breeding. Does that make sense? Yes? So species has very specific definition. 2 parts. And what are the 2 parts? 2 organisms are considered the same species if they're able to interbreed and have fertile offspring. Very good. Got it? You understand this? Mucho importante. Must know. All right. They adapt to the environment. They adapt to the environment. Okay. So remember the 4th characteristic at living things? Interact with and adapt to the environment, right? Look. This bear over here, we know winter is coming, right? So what does he do? He goes to lots of walimas, right? He feeds himself up so he has lots of storage of food. And he hibernates, right? I know, so winter's coming, better go to walimas, right? Don't miss the walima, right? That's right. And hibernate in winter. He's adapting to the... And then there are certain bears, like the polar bear over here, doesn't have to do that because he's adapted to their environment, right? Because why? Because it's winter all the time. There's no place to hide. Where are you going to go? You escape where? You know what I'm saying? Come out in 10, 20 years? No. Wait for global warming. No, it's always winter. He has to adapt to the environment, right? You follow? So they're interacting to the environment. Now look at this. Now trees, deciduous trees, those that lose their leaves into winter, the reason they lose their leaves is because they sense daylight. They sense daylight. As the day gets shorter, they sense winter's coming, and then they lose their leaves. They save all their energy, right? You know why leaves shrivel? Because the trees are extracting every bit of glucose that they need to save and everything they need in the roots and the rest of the plant, and then they discard the whatever left over. You understand? So they're sensing daylight, and they're sensing the temperature changes, and then they lose their leaves. Correct? So to interact with your environment, you have to be able to do what? To sense it. Sense it. Correct? Sense it. You follow? So if for a living thing, true or false, therefore, a living thing must be able to sense its immediate environment. Yes or no? Yes. It has to be able to sense its immediate environment. So whatever the stimulus is, whatever they're sensing is called the stimulus. Whatever they're sensing is called the stimulus. Response is the living thing's response to the stimulus. This is called the stimulus response phenomenon. Like the temperature was cold. What was the stimulus there? Temperature. The response, do you understand? So for a living thing to interact with the environment, it has to sense the environment. Whatever it senses is called the stimulus. Whatever the response of the living thing is called response. Does that make sense? You touch something hot, the stimulus is heat. Let go is the response. Does that make sense? Now, why? Why is it that living things have to know their environment? Why do you think it's important for living things to be able to sense their environment? What do you think? Because who wants to freeze in the room? Yes? If it gets cold enough, it's going to be really bad. If you don't do anything about it, some animals, if they don't change or adapt, they die. Do they want to die? Nobody wants to die. You follow? So, the reason it's important for living to sense their environment is because for their survival and to maintain comfortable living situations. Look, room here was cold. It was really cold, trust me. Is it going to kill me? Probably not. Right? We don't function very well at very cold temperature. In other words, watch this. If it's too hot, we don't like it. If it's too cold, we don't like it. Yes or no? Yes or no? So there's a happy medium. Not too hot, not too warm, just right. Yes? There's a happy medium. There's a happy medium for many things. For temperature, for blood pressure, for sodium in the blood. Yes? Oh, there are many. So there's a happy medium where life exists. And you try to keep conditions in that medium. Does you understand? Very important concept. And this concept of keeping things the same is called homeostasis. Another much important term. One important term, species. Second important term, homeostasis. Let's divide this into two terms. Homeo means same. Same. Stasis means state. Same state. In other words, regulation of the organism's internal environment, like my body temperature, to maintain conditions that are suitable for survival. That's called homeostasis. Right? Right? You follow? So, homeostasis for living things means to maintain, do whatever it takes to regulate internal environment. Who cares about the outside environment? Because I only care about room temperature because it affected my body, my internal environment, right? Okay. I don't care what the temperature is outside. So I do care. You follow? So they care because they want to maintain a certain internal. Some enzymes don't function at certain temperatures. It's cold. Outside cold, you go out there, pick up the mail in the morning. It's cold. And you shiver, right? That's an example of homeostasis because you go out there, it's cold, and you shiver because shivering generates heat. So your body temperature goes down, your body reacts to it to maintain certain body temperature. You go like this. Why? That generates heat. Yes? So shivering is an example of how we maintain homeostasis or maintaining internal environment that's suitable for optimal survival. Two very important terms. Must know. Species, definition of species. When this concept of homeostasis, you must understand it. Now look. Okay? So organisms interact with their immediate environment, right? Organisms interact with their immediate environment on an hour-to-hour basis, minute-to-minute basis, and also over generations. Interactions over generations, years, and eons is called evolution because they're adapting. I adapted to this environment, right? Or if it was cold, I might grab a sweater. Long-term adaptation is termed evolution. That's the fourth characteristic of the environment. Yeah? The leaf-tailed gecko looks like a leaf-tailed gecko because it evolved over millions of years. Because why? It interacted with their environment. Does that make sense? Okay, so these are the four characteristics of living things. 1, they have orderly structure. 2, they grow. 3, they reproduce because that's important for the survival of species. It's hard for the species to survive if it doesn't reproduce. Yes? 4, they adjust to changes in environment. And we talked about the stimulus-response phenomenon. We talked about homeostasis. And we talked about long-term adaptations of species interacting in the environment, and that's called evolution. We suggested a definition for biology. We said that there appears to be order and certain balance in the nature. That living things have certain characteristics, and there are 4 that we talked about. And the last topic of the chapter is how we even study bio. How do we study these things? As I said, you can't measure a forest, right? You can't go count every single tree and weigh all the mountains. How do we study? And then we talked about the scientific method. It's a topic in itself, right? We'll talk about that after 2-minute mental pause, break, course. Until then, salatu wassalamu ala